Things are generally going so well for Borderlands 3, but unfortunately Randy Pitchford can't help but bury all this good PR under a boatload of drama. Many of you may recall that it wasn't long ago that he threw a tantrum at news outlet Game Informer for correctly pointing out that Borderlands 3 will in fact have cosmetic microtransactions, despite Randy having claimed during his recent Borderlands 3 stage presentation that the game would not have any microtransactions. Here's the footage in question, you can see for yourself.
And I'm sure we're going to do all kinds of fun customizations like heads and skins, but we're not doing any of that free-to-play junk. There's not going to be any microtransactions. There's not going to be any of that nonsense.
This statement is, of course, false. Borderlands 3 has been confirmed to have cosmetic microtransactions. Don't get me wrong, there are cheap downloadable cosmetics for after the game launches. They're nothing super nefarious. People are fine with how this worked in Borderlands 2, and they'll probably be fine with how this works in Borderlands 3. But let's still call them what they are, microtransactions, and Game Informer merely made that clarification. Now, it's entirely possible that Randy Pitchford didn't mean to lie, that he simply misspoke, or that he somehow thought mini cosmetic DLCs don't technically constitute microtransactions when they in fact do. It could have been a simple mistake and we could have left it at that. Game Informer at no point insinuated he went out of his way to deceive consumers. The outlet merely pointed out the discrepancy between what he said and what the actual plans are for Borderlands 3 in terms of monetization. This wasn't really a big deal for most people. Many got the impression that Borderlands 3 microtransactions would function the same way as Borderlands 2 did, which is very much tolerable. This whole story would have been nothing more than a fart in the wind had Randy Pitchford not blown the whole situation out of proportion by playing the victim, verbally attacking Game Informer for their article, and insinuating he's being falsely accused of being a liar. But instead, Randy ranted about how Game Informer published an article with clickbait headline and how they fucked him on this, when all the outlet did was accurately report, because that's what they're supposed to do. They're a news outlet, not an extension of Randy Pitchford's PR. They're supposed to raise questions, and this is a concept that Randy cannot seem to grasp. So Randy ended up bringing more attention to Game Informer's article and to his childish attitude, and he ultimately did more harm than good. I wish I could say this was all there is to it. I wish I could say this was the end to it. But more recently, serious accusations have been levied against Randy Pitchford by a former Gearbox employee. The next bit of drama began with a tweet by David Eddings, the original voice actor of Claptrap. Many of you probably know by now, but Claptrap is no longer being voiced by David Eddings. He's now being played by Jim Ferranda. When somebody asked David on Twitter whether he'd be reprising his role, David had this to say: "No, for the first time I insisted on getting paid for my performance, and all of a sudden they couldn't afford me. Now, I'm not telling them how to run their business, but maybe next time they should put the $12 million payment from 2K in the Gearbox bank account instead. Just saying." So a couple things you need to know for context. First of all, David Eddings worked as Gearbox's VP of Business Development before he left in March 2017. So he was both an employee at the game studio as well as the voice of Claptrap. It would seem as though as VP of Business Development, as someone who's already getting paid, he was expected to voice Claptrap pro bono, and he was seemingly happy with the arrangement for some time. But for Borderlands 3, he apparently asked to be paid for his voice work, and they didn't do that. They refused. As for the bit about the $12 million payment, he's referring to the lawsuit that a former Gearbox lawyer filed against Randy Pitchford. And one of the lawsuit's accusations include that Randy took a secret $12 million bonus from publisher Take-Two that would have otherwise gone to Gearbox, the studio, and its staff. And this is a case that's still ongoing, that's still being resolved. Speaking of Gearbox, in a separate tweet, David emphasized that his qualm is solely with Randy Pitchford and not at all with the other talented developers at Gearbox, stating that it's not fair to blame the employees for the actions of one person, and that it is employees who are forced to cringe and bear it every time the boss shoots himself in the foot. A few hours later, Randy Pitchford responded with his own counter-accusations, tweeting the following: "There was no force, he wanted it and reveled in it. The issue today is that Mr. Eddings Eddings is bitter and disgruntled about having been terminated. He was offered 2x scale, he refused. I don't want him to do it unless he wants to do it, as motivation affects performance. Mr. Eddings was paid very handsomely during his employment. After his employment, he was made a relatively generous offer to reprise the role. Unfortunately, he turned that opportunity down. Adding to the conversation was a Gearbox spokesperson who responded to inquiries from IGN with the following statement. Gearbox works to treat and compensate all voice actors at industry standards. We offer the opportunity for salaried employees to voice characters in the game, but is not a mandatory responsibility to their job requirements. In this particular case, now that he was no longer an employee, we offered him an industry standard rate, but were not able to reach an agreement. We are confident and happy with Jim Ferranda as the voice of Claptrap, and we're confident our fans will be too. David would eventually get wind of Randy Pitchford's latest tweets and Gearbox's statement, and in response, he posted a long string of tweets in which he explained his side of the story. Here's what he had to say. I was fine moving on after Gearbox, but when my former boss starts mouthing off about various aspects of my employment, including how highly compensated I was and how generous he is, I feel obligated to correct the record. I had a lot of mixed feelings when asked to reprise the role of Claptrap late last year, and eventually realized I was willing to put differences aside and do something cool for Borderlands fans with my friends at Gearbox. I ultimately offered to do it for free in exchange for past royalties owed, plus an apology for something I've never spoken about publicly until now. Randy physically assaulted me in the lobby of the Marriott Marquis at GDC 2017. Personally, I think Randy's been on tilt the last few years. He's not the victim he portrays himself to be. I even blocked him a couple years ago for stalking me on social media. Enough is enough. It's nice not feeling the need to spot any sleight of hand these days or wonder if the card was chosen or forced. I'm happy to be free from the half-truths and full-on deceptions, and thankful to no longer hear people referred to as muggles like a conman refers to a mark. As an aside, seems a bit conspicuous that he chimed in on my salary, but didn't mention anything about the $12 million of revenue he siphoned away from the employee royalty pool. FYI, Gearbox employees are asked to take lower salaries with the promise of royalty shares. 2K says they won't give a statement regarding an ongoing lawsuit, but if the allegation is false, then it sure seems a lot easier to just deny it, since that's the only reason they're mentioned. The whole thing stinks. So that's as far as that exchange goes currently. No doubt Randy will issue his own response to all this in the not-so-distant future. It is worth keeping in mind that we are currently looking at a he said, she said situation. It's David's word against Randy's. But taking a biased stance for a moment here, if I personally had to put my money on whose word I'd believe more, it's a no-brainer. The fact of the matter is that I do not trust much of what comes out of Randy Pitchford's mouth because he's a well-documented bullshitter. Keep in mind that David isn't the only one calling Randy out on twisting the story on why a role in Borderlands 3 isn't being reprised by the original actor. Back in April 2019, you may recall that there was a bit of a back and forth between Troy Baker and Randy Pitchford about the fact that Troy would not be reprising his character, Reese. During a panel when a fan asked Troy about being replaced, he expressed mild discontent with the following statement. If Gearbox decides that they'll let me do it, that'll be awesome. I have no idea. There was a possibility that I was going to be in it. Then I saw that epic trailer and everyone's like, oh my god, there is Reese. And I went, well, there we go. I've never done this before, but I would love for Gearbox to know that it's not about me, it's about that character. If they're going to bring back characters from Telltale Borderlands, it should be the people that originated the characters. From there, when Randy was asked on Twitter by a fan why Troy Baker isn't returning, Randy's response was, quote, "You'll have to ask Troy. I was told by the audio director that he turned it down. Fortunately, with how Reese appears in the game, I don't think it actually matters at all. You'll see for yourself when the game comes out, and you may disagree with me on that or not." Troy Baker, however, was taken aback by the inconsistency between Randy's account and his own, so in an interview with outlet Only Single Player, Troy responded to questions about Randy's response with this: "Their timeline tells an interesting story. I think it's interesting that Randy Pitchford tweeted out that I turned it down, and then he said he heard that I turned it down. So maybe I would fact check, before I tweet it out to the internet. So the insinuation there is that Randy Pitchford isn't telling the truth about the situation, that Troy Baker never in fact actively turned down the role. It would seem as though by Troy's account, they never really reached out to him to finalize prospects of him playing Reese again. Another account of Randy's lies came a few days ago on May 3rd. Not long after Randy threw that tantrum about Game Informer's article, Kotaku's Jason Schreier posted a tweet pointing out another occasion in which Randy lied through his teeth while playing the victim. Attached to the tweet are 3 images, one showing an article from September 2016 in which Jason reported that according to his sources, Battleborn would be going free to play, another image showing a tweet posted by Randy on the same day calling the article reckless and insisting that reports of Battleborn going free to play are completely false, and finally here's an image of an article from June 2017 confirming that Battleborn did in fact go free to play. This is all certainly very reminiscent of what happened with Game Informer more recently. And don't even get me started with all the lies and bullshit surrounding alien colonial marines. That could be a whole video by itself. Hell, Jim Sterling in particular has covered that saga extensively. Speaking of, remember that time when Randy pretended like he didn't know Jim Sterling's name during an interview with IGN in a pathetic and cowardly attempt to make the interviewer say his name?
I remember, what's the name of that guy? He's the journalist guy. His thing is he's always mad. He's a big dude. He's got a British accent. He's got a hard on for me. I can't remember that guy.
I'm not sure who you're talking about.
He's a journalist. He's kind of big. He's got a British accent, and he's always angry.
Jim Sterling's fans.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is the kind of man Randy Pitchford is and has always been, at least in my eyes. It's poetic that he prides himself as a magician, a craft dedicated to misdirecting and bullshitting the audience. Whether he knows it or not, he evokes the visage of a compulsive liar who struggles to look introspectively and who must always play the victim, acting as if he's being maliciously targeted and hunted by those who seek to merely clarify confusion or flat out call him out on his bullshit. So while this whole exchange between David and Randy may all be he said, she said, you'll have to forgive me if I find it more difficult to trust Randy's account given what we know about him, given what people keep saying about him, given what he's done. You'll have to forgive me if I can actually picture Randy physically assaulting an associate at the slightest perceived provocation, though what that provocation might have been is currently unknown. After all, with his tirade against Game Informer, he's clearly demonstrated that temperament isn't one of his strong suits. It's all a damn shame, as Borderlands 3 truly does look like a fantastic game that doesn't need all this drama weighing it down. If Randy treated his colleagues and employees with more integrity and respect, if he took the time to look in the mirror for 1 second, if he would just calm down and think before acting and speaking, he would be less of a liability, and the general focus would be on how much fun Borderlands 3 is looking to be rather than Randy's shady saga. But instead, we're left to bear witness to his tantrums, alongside accusations of inappropriate behavior both as an employer and a coworker levied against him. Then again, if there is truth to David's accusations against Randy, perhaps it is best that this is all brought to light, that Randy faces the music. On the other hand, if it turns out it's David who is lying or twisting the truth, he'll look quite the fool. Accusing someone of physical assault is quite serious, and if it turns out he's using falsehoods to gain the moral high ground, it's going to have serious repercussions. I would be hard-pressed to say that I know the whole story though, so beyond my personal bias and reservations when it comes to trusting Randy Pitchford, I'll just have to leave it at that until more information is uncovered and the situation is further clarified. In the meantime, I'd love to hear what your take is on the back and forth between Randy and David in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.